Good evening and welcome alumni, students, colleagues and supporters of the Dickson Poon School of Law and the King's Business School. My name is Alexis Beaumont. I'm the Alumni and Stakeholder Engagement Manager for the Dickson Poon School of Law. Hello to everyone attending this evening from here in Bush House, and a hello to everyone who is joining us from home or the workplace or wherever you are, zooming in from around the world. It's wonderful to bring our communities together for this cross-faculty event, combining the fields of law, financial services and digital assets. Tonight, we will hear from Ruan Zhu and Barry Griffin as they discuss the present and future of the crypto economy, the Bahamas perspective. But before I introduce you to our chair and hand over to Ruan to lead the discussion, I would like to acknowledge the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. As our patron, the Queen had a long and valued association with kings and visited the university on numerous occasions, usually accompanied by her late husband, His Royal Highness Prince Philip. The Queen has seen 12 principals of King's College London and had a lasting connection with our campuses, officially opening the Strand Building, the Morn Library, Bush House, the home of the Business School, and Somerset House East Wing, the home of the Law School. As a King's community, we join with the nation in mourning the loss of Her Majesty, and to reflect the tone of the mood and pay our respects, we will not be serving alcohol during the networking reception tonight, which will follow directly after the panel talk. I now invite you to join me in a minute's silence to reflect on Her Majesty's extraordinary life, her connection to kings, and her 70-year reign. Thank you, everyone. This evening's discussion on the present and future of the crypto economy, the Bahamas perspective, will be chaired by Dr. Ruan Zhu. Ruan is a postdoctoral research associate at King's Business School, currently working with King's academics on the Economic and Social Research Council project, focusing on an ethnographic investigation of crypto asset firms. I'm thrilled to now hand over to Ruan to lead tonight's discussion and introduce our law school alumnus and panellist, Barry Griffin. Thank you, Ruan.
Shall I go?
Thank you, Alexis, for the warm welcome and introduction. Hi and good evening. My name is Ruan Xu. I'm a postdoctoral research associate here at King's Business School. My research focuses on new and emerging technologies and their societal impact, for example, on organizational work, especially the future of fintech work. And since late 2019, together with Professor Alex Prada, Dr. Julie Veck, we've been conducting a global research on the crypto economy and funded by the ESRC. So our research looked into various aspects of crypto economy, including the collaboration between software engineers and financial experts, the social technical infrastructure of blockchain and mining, and the secondary trading market, and also regulation. Therefore, it's a great pleasure to chair the panel tonight. This is the second cross-faculty event with Dickson Poon School of Law and King's Business School. So tonight we are delighted to have a fantastic speaker with us, Barry Griffin, who is sitting next to me. Barry is a partner at Sovereign Advisors Bahamas. Barry graduated from the law school in 2012 with an LLB in law and began to pursue a career in commercial law, working at some of the top firms in the Bahamas. Having had great passion for politics, Barry now juggles his time between his role as the Vice President of the Senate, representing the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and being a partner at Sovereign Advisors Bahamas, which is a boutique commercial law firm specializing in financial services and digital assets. So as a partner, his work covers everything from cryptocurrencies, digital tokens, digital exchange, NFT, and a growing metaverse. So Barry's experience in financial service as a corporate lawyer has encouraged him to move towards digital asset space. And it's also interesting to know that the Bahamas is one of the only handful countries that has legislated this area. Great. So Barry, do you want to say hi to each other? How are you doing tonight?
Yes, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Thank you very much to the King's Law School and the Business School for having me this evening. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm glad it was able to be organized. I'd just like to take a moment to recognize a colleague of mine who is here with me, Mr. Philip Galanis, who is sitting here in the front row. He is the chairman of the Bahamas Trade Commission, and one of my duties in the Bahamas, as well as being vice president of the Senate, I'm the deputy chairman of the Bahamas Trade Commission, and we're here in the UK on a trade envoy. Mr. Galanis is a noted accountant in the Bahamas, and his accounting firm is actually one of the few firms in the Bahamas that now deals in digital assets and cryptocurrency. So he's also an expert in the field, so I'm happy to have him here along with me. And so once again, thank you, Rowan, for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Great to have you here tonight. So together with Barry tonight, we will explore the topic, the present and the future of the crypto economy, and hear about the Bahamas perspective. So just to let you know that we are very keen to make the discussion engaging. So at the end of the panel, in the last 20 minutes, we'll open the floor to hear your thoughts, and then we welcome your questions as well. So let's get the conversation started. So Barry, we know that you've done great work in and provided your legal counsel on digital asset, like in the Bahamas, from a country level and also on the firm level, right? So we know that digital asset is kind of like a newly emerged type of asset, and it comes with a new set of features, which is different from traditional asset. For example, it can be hacked, and it's highly volatile, and then it also, the technology has certain of anonymity built into it. So does this kind of like new type of asset with the new type of risk translate also into the legal domain? What are the major kind of like legal issues you've been helping your clients with?
Well, first, I just want to kind of give a larger perspective on the Bahamas before I delve into the particular question. So for those of you who don't know, the Bahamas is a small island nation in the Atlantic Ocean, just north of the Caribbean Sea and just below Florida. So for context, the main island is about 30 minutes flight away from Florida. Our most northern island is about 20 minutes away from Florida. So that gives you perspective of the access we have to the North American market, the Latin American market, as well as the Caribbean. The Bahamas is also, it's an independent country, but it was a British colonial country. We still have now the king as our head of state. And so there's a long history between the Bahamas and the United Kingdom, the Bahamas and Europe. And so the Bahamas has always had access to these jurisdictions, and since about the 1930s, financial services has been a huge part of the Bahamian economy. Tourism is the largest industry, financial services is the second largest. So the Bahamas has a long history in financial services, and so that kind of is the backdrop to what we now do in the digital space. As those of you who follow financial services, especially in the offshore world, would know, over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, there's just been an onslaught of regulatory requirements, compliance, AML, anti-terrorist financing laws, money laundering laws. And so the Bahamas is very keen to be innovative and kind of keep a pace, because these things can almost be the death knell of financial services, which is a huge part of our economy. And so as part of that innovation, we kind of look to the digital asset space as a subsect of our financial services sector. And so the same kind of regulation that our international clients expect from financial services sector is the kind of regulation they expect in the sort of digital space. And so clients who come to the Bahamas for the digital asset, in the digital asset space, are typically those who are already in the financial services space, or those clients who typically kind of know what they want. A lot of people may be under the impression that these crypto firms are shadowy figures kind of looking to hide in the back and have these sort of anonymous transactions. But we find that the reality is that firms are actually looking for a jurisdiction to be regulated in. The Bahamas is only one of a handful of jurisdictions that actually has legislation in this space. And so we find that a lot of digital asset companies come to us precisely for that. They say, we want to be in a jurisdiction that is friendly to crypto, but we also want to be in a jurisdiction that is regulated, so we can show the world that we're not hiding. So things that we help clients with, we help them to understand our regulatory framework. We help them to understand legislation in terms of the requirements that they would have to follow in terms of cybersecurity, data protection. They want sort of surety of the government stance on cryptocurrency, so that they can be sure that there wouldn't be any fluctuation from government to government, or if there's some major crash, as there has been recently, government policy swiftly changing. And so from that perspective, a lot of these companies are well established, or they sort of have the base of their business down pack,
right.
But they're looking for a jurisdiction that can provide clarity. They're looking for a politically neutral and safe jurisdiction, and they're looking for spaces that have, as the Bahamas does, a bevy of financial services professionals, legal professionals who can help steer them in the right direction. And so those are a lot of the initial issues that we deal with, getting them comfortable with the Bahamas, comfortable with the legislation, letting them know the protections that they have in the Bahamas.
Thank you. When you firstly approach to legalize or to adapt the legal framework, do you actually see as a new type of asset, or is it kind of same kind of type of asset that the traditional market has treating it?
So the act in the Bahamas that regulates the industry is called the Digital Assets and Registered Exchanges Act. So we call it the DARE Act. And so one of the things that clients are particularly pleased with is that the act clearly defines a lot of terms in the crypto space. So it defines what a digital asset is. Yep. And so within our law, it is considered a different type of asset. And so we've defined a digital asset as any digital or tokenized asset that is a store of value, or that is linked directly, contractually, to another store of value. And so in our law, it is regarded as a separate type of asset.
I see. So, so on a country level, right? You just tell us, how should I think about the legal framework for crypto? Is it just to regulate the market, or how should I see us should I think about it when I start developing this kind of legal framework? What are the features for these legal frameworks?
So while we are in the digital space, I think it's fair to say that this is completely new for everyone. And so we're not sitting here claiming to be the be all and end all of everything crypto. And so we're keen to stay very in tune with our clients, with those persons in the market. One of the advantages of the Bahamas is that in a lot of other jurisdictions, legislation is kind of top down. It comes from the government and sort of directed at the market. In the Bahamas, we take a bottom-up approach. So those actors in the sector are actively involved in policy and law. So we bring them to the table. So they kind of tell us, what they're looking for, and it's almost a hand-in-hand collaboration with the private sector. And so from a country sort of level, we look to industry and especially in the crypto space, the digital asset space, where things can change so quickly, and regulators really can't keep a pace with everything. We really look to industry to provide counsel and advice on legislation and on regulations and changes that we should be making to keep a pace with everything that's going on in the market. As a jurisdiction, we are heavily regulated. There lots of from the European Union, from the United States, and so we are very particular, not in our excitement to get involved in cryptocurrency, to have it be the Wild Wild West. And so we've consulted experts around the world, in the Bahamas as well as around the world, to ensure that our framework takes advantage of the larger financial services framework that we're known for in the Bahamas. And so considerations you would have would be definitely data protection, which is in our act, that all registrants or those in the digital asset space must keep proper records of all issuances, all transfers, all everything on your blockchain. So data protection is huge. Cyber security is also huge. Another consideration is who we actually let into the industry. So in the Bahamas, in order to be involved in the digital asset space, you must be a registrant under our DARE Act. And the DARE Act is regulated by the Securities Commission of the Bahamas. So every single entity, every single individual that is part of the digital asset community, you have to be a registrant of the Securities Commission. And one of the criteria that the Securities Commission has is that you must be a fit and proper person. So it's a deliberately sort of broad scope that the Securities Commission can use to allow folks to enter into the industry or to block them from the industry. And you look at all sorts of things, from their experience, their overall reputation, you look at their ability to fund the scale of the project or the business that they have, so their capitalization, their resources, their capacity. From a legal point, you look to their internal policies within their company to ensure that they have the proper safeguards in place. So from a country perspective, we're very sure to be minded that only those who we think are fit and proper to be in this regulated environment are actually allowed to work within that industry.
So drawing from the experience of you working with the firms, so how do they understand a regulatory clarity? What kind of things that they are pursuing to achieve a regulatory clarity that they want?
So as I stated before, they from a macro level, they just want to know that laws aren't going to change overnight, that the government has a clear policy position on cryptocurrency, digital assets. They want a friendly environment. So that's first and foremost. And so we have that in the Bahamas. The government itself has released white papers on digital assets and cryptocurrency that have been laid in Parliament. Our act was originally passed in 2020. We've had 2 pieces of subsequent regulations, and so that they are sure that as the industry progresses, we progress step in step with the industry. So, for example, at the moment, stable coins are a big discussion in the Bahamas, and NFTs are a big discussion. So when our initial act was passed in 2020, NFTs were kind of around the discussion, but NFTs weren't huge then. But as you can see, over the last year or so, NFTs have exploded, and the discussions around stablecoins have exploded. And so we've committed to industry that we will have regulations in place for both NFTs and stablecoins by the end of this year. And so clients are sure they have that clarity that where there are gaps or lacunas in the law or their understanding, the Securities Commission is pretty quick to pump out regulations and legislations to provide that clarity that they need so that they can conduct their business and know they're not contravening the law.
I see. I heard you mention that like the legal framework also covers the issuers of the token. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Okay.
Is everyone now can mint an NFT? Can everyone now go and do an initial coin offering?
I'll actually pull up a piece of the legislation. It's actually quite technical, and so for those who, attorneys in the space or law students, I think this might be useful. So our act applies to any organizer, issuer, founder, purchaser, or investor that participates in the formation, promotion, maintenance, organization, sale, or redemption of an initial token offering, as well as any legal entity carrying on a digital asset business, irrespective of any physical location from which the activity is carried out. So as you can see, that's a very broad definition that intends to encompass virtually anyone or anything in the digital asset space. And so if you come under any of that, you're required to be registered under this DARE Act and abide by the regulations of the Securities Commission. So to answer your question, no, not anyone can just participate in the industry. You must apply to be a registrant under the DARE Act so that you can participate legally in the industry in the Bahamas.
How long are you think can the companies register in to kind of to participate in the market?
So our Securities Commission has committed that once you submit a full application complete with everything they need, all of the supporting documents, etc., that you would get your response within 14 to 21 days. So in practice, we found that they've pretty much lived up to that, and within 21 days, you will know either way whether you're a registrant or not. Again, the industry is fast moving, and these companies aren't sitting around, waiting months for approval. They will literally look for another jurisdiction because oftentimes they have a new product or token or coin that they want to issue and they want to be quickly regulated. So it takes, on average, about 21 days to be a registrant.
Wow, that's very quick. Yeah. So is that why also FTX that landed in the Bahamas?
Yeah, and in the Bahamas, we were very happy and pleased that FTX came. FTX is I think the second largest exchange in the world, and they recently relocated from Hong Kong to the Bahamas, and it's primarily because of this DARE Act. Again, they said they wanted a legal framework that completely regulates the industry that they participate in. They wanted a government that's friendly to crypto, and so all of these things are reasons why FTX would have come. I think those of us in the Bahamas, we would also like to think they came for the sun, sand, and sea as well, and the ability to be able to work and live in the Bahamas.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you. So we also want to talk about another interesting project that's happening in the Bahamas, which is the sand dollar. So the sand dollar is So the Bahamas launched the sand dollar in October 2020 as one of the two fully operational retail CBDC, which is the central bank digital currency worldwide. Could you tell us a little bit about it? So how is it different from the Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency?
So the sand dollar is the digital version of the Bahamas dollar. So like cash, the sand dollar is issued by the Central Bank of the Bahamas. So it is not a cryptocurrency because it literally is the digital version of the Bahamian dollar. So it's backed by legislation, backed by the Central Bank, and can only be issued by the Central Bank of the Bahamas. So it's digital cash essentially.
Okay, so now the retail CBDC is using, but how about the wholesale CBDC?
So the sand dollar, just to give you a little background on why and how the Bahamas implemented the sand dollar. So the Bahamas is an archipelago. We have over 700 islands and keys. Over 22 of those islands are inhabited. Some of them are very sparsely inhabited. You would have a few thousand people. And we found that the commercial banks of late find little to no commercial value in a lot of these small islands. So they're beginning to pull out, leaving folks with literally no financial services institutions. And so the sand dollar is the Bahamian government's response to that. So our first and foremost priority was to ensure that folks in these far-flung islands and settlements that have little access to banks or financial services, that they're able to access cash. It's very expensive to fly cash from island to island and the security concerns.
Right.
And so that was the first priority of the Bahamian government, is to ensure that folks in those places get it. So the retail portion of it was the priority for the Bahamas. And because we've had so much success in implementing that version of it, beginning in Q1 of next year, we move on to the second stage, which would be wholesale adoption by the commercial banks, other financial services institutions within the country. But there are many reasons that countries would have a digital currency, but that was our primary concern, to make sure that those persons who had little access to banks and financial services were able to still deal in this economy.
So now, like, everyone, like, in the Bahamas can use it as like a legal tender.
Yep, it can.
Yeah, what does legal tender mean?
So just before that, I'll just quickly show you. I actually have the app on the phone, so you can go in the App Store, download the Sand Dollar app. For those of you can see, it kind of pops up. I enter my security password, and you can see that I have only just $26 in Sand Dollars. So Phil Galanis, we just did a test before we came in to see if it works here or anywhere, and he transferred me a dollar, and so it's pretty quick and easy, just like any other fintech app. And so it for us, we were hoping it's a game changer in the way companies interact with consumers, the way Bahamians deal with cash. But to answer your question in terms of legal tender, that's one of the main differences between a central bank-backed digital currency and cryptocurrency. Yep. So the legal definition of legal tender is very simple. It's literally anything that is recognized by the government or law as a proper means to settle a public debt or a private debt that is essentially backed by law. So right now, the UK government can say, Apple phones are legal tender. They put that into law. They say the equivalent is, $1,000 USD, and you'd be able to walk into a store and exchange your Apple phone for a product. So in the Bahamas, to regulate the Sand Dollar, we would have done an overhaul of our Central Bank Act, which then recognized in law, so it's Sand Dollar, but in law it's called the Bahamas Dollar Digital Currency. So that is now recognized in law as legal tender. Okay. So that's the difference between the cryptocurrency and the central bank backed. It's recognized in law. So theoretically, after adoption is more widespread, no one in the Bahamas would be able to deny the digital currency as a means of payment because it's legal tender. However, you can deny, Bitcoin or Ethereum because it's not legal tender recognized by the government.
Oh, I see. The question I have is, like, can I have some Sand Dollar?
So before I left the Bahamas, I spoke to the officials at the central bank, and I asked, and their answer was not really legal. So for a lawyer, I was a bit, wanted a more precise answer. But the reality is that anyone can come to the Bahamas and get a Bahamian dollar and spend a Bahamian dollar. So that's their theoretical answer for Sand Dollar, is that anyone would be able to access it. So in law, there are different tiers. So there's a first tier where you can sign up for the app. There's very minimal KYC, and this is intended for underserved populations, immigrants, migrants, so that they'd be able to access it. But as you begin to trade in a higher value of the currency, the KYC becomes greater. So anyone who enters the Bahamas would be able to have the first level of the Sand Dollar so that they can transact in the Bahamas. But as you increase, there would be more KYC to answer. So the Bahamas continues to be one of the only countries in the world, unfortunately, that has very strict foreign exchange controls. Yeah. And so as a non-Bahamian, after certain levels of funds, you'd be required to have approval from the central bank to do certain things. So you wouldn't necessarily be able to have $1 million in Sand Dollar and just kind of use around the world.
Yeah, I think also one of the questions or the concerns that there were over CBDC was like whether the central bank can see the transaction, and how about the data protection over those transaction data.
So they can. So they obviously automatically have all of the transaction logs from the Sand Dollar app. But the central bank was also sure not to block out the private sector activity, and so digital payment services and apps can apply to the central bank to be involved with the Sand Dollar. And so at present, they don't automatically see those transactions, but all of those payment providers are required to report on a quarterly and annual basis. So each quarter and each year, they'll see the overall scope of transactions and the usage, how quickly it's adopted, how much Sand Dollar is circulating throughout the economy.
Yeah, so how is the experience so far? How's the adoption, as you mentioned?
So admittedly, the adoption isn't as high as we would like it. Sand Dollar was introduced at the end of 2019. And as we know, 2020 came around and then we had COVID. So everything pretty much shut down. The Bahamas, we had some very restrictive lockdowns and curfews, and so commerce pretty much stopped. And so that put a dent in our adoption activities. And so it's not as high as we would like it, though there's lots of interest. And so now that the economy is back open, the central bank has a push that they're beginning to start at the end of this year to increase adoption. But as I said, the priority of the government right now is to focus on those out islands that have a lack of access to some financial services, also to focus on certain disadvantaged communities, like I said, such as those migrant and immigrant communities that may not be in the financial system, and then to focus on our city, for example, where there's low adoption. So there's higher adoption in those out islands, and so I think as this year ends and next year progresses, we'll see higher adoption as the central bank begins to push this again.
Yeah, is it they push it in the user cases, like more place that you can use it, or is it they just give $10 for free? How is the? So
both. It has to be a two-tier approach because on the one hand, we want folks to be able to have Sand Dollar to be able to exchange with each other. We want employers to be able to pay folks in Sand Dollar. We're also in the process of having government agencies accept Sand Dollar. So most of the major government agencies accept it now, but not all. And so it's still a process to have all government agencies accept Sand Dollar. And as part of that adoption measure, you have teams from the central bank who literally go business to business, introducing Sand Dollar, showing folks, and having businesses sign up so that the usage on that end of the spectrum is more, because it doesn't make sense if the population all have Sand Dollar apps, but they can't easily just walk into a store and use it.
I see. Okay, it's like they need to do a lot more endorsement and sales work.
The groundwork, literally the groundwork, because as you can imagine, some people are still skeptical, especially on the business side. They want to know that this is seamless. They want to know that the money is automatically in their account, that they can transfer it as they please, that there are no holdups, and so it's just that kind of education process to let them know how it works. But once we kind of do that, we find that businesses quickly sign up to it.
Right. Another debate and also discussion they tend to have over the CBDC is whether they need to have blockchain in it. So in the case of Bahama, like, is it like there's blockchain involved, and how was it done? What's the consideration behind that?
So it is blockchain, and they have at the time when it was launched, the highest level of blockchain to trace transactions, the highest level of cybersecurity. But I do know that they are in discussions on the further development of the blockchain technology.
Okay, so is it like the base layer technology? Every transaction, for example, if I transact to you and then it will be locked in the blockchain? How?
And that is at the central bank, so not with the individual consumer, but at the central bank level, they can keep track of the blockchain.
I see. Good. Thank you for the information. And as today we are talking about the current, the present, and the future. So I would like to ask you, where do you see the future with digital asset and blockchain development?
So from where I sit in government and in the private sector, I think that digital assets are here to stay. I think the exact form that they take or they will take is a bit uncertain. It really depends on how the major economies of the world decide to regulate the industry.
Right.
But I think at this point, it's safe to say that within the financial services space, digital assets are here to stay. And obviously, we in the Bahamas hope that we'll be at the forefront of that innovation and that adoption.
Yeah, if you like, do you have any like suggestions or like to people who would like to move into this industry? Like, what do you think would the major work that they need to focus on?
So there are lots of startups in the area. So depending on the side you fall on, whether on the business school side or the law school side, I say that a lot of great experience comes from working with startups. So when my firm first decided to enter the digital asset space, we had a client approach us, a startup company that had some very grand plans. And so a lot of the work we did for them was actually pro bono, because at that point, we too were just learning how to advise clients and work in that space and work with the DARE Act. So it was as much practice and learning for us on the law side in how to advise clients as it is for the clients themselves to now be in that regulated industry.
Yeah.
So I think any experience you can get with startups would be great. On the law side, we see that digital asset, that kind of industry will sort of just become a subsect of financial services generally.
Okay.
So we find that our Securities Commission and regulators around the world particularly like people who have financial services experience to approve, to as I said before, in terms of being fit and proper persons, part of that is the experience you would have in areas like financial services. So any experience you can get in that general area, I think, would be helpful as well.
Thank you. I think tonight we hear a very excellent account of how should we think about digital asset and relating questions from Barry. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now, so now we will open the floor for more questions, and we'd like to hear what you think. Perfect. Yep, so we have that gentleman on the back, and then in a second.
Hi, well, firstly, thank you so much for coming to, I was going to say my school, but our school, since
Awesome,
you were
yes,
also
yes.
a fellow alum.
Proud King's graduate.
Awesome. I wanted to ask a little bit more about the current legal standing of tokenization. I wanted to know if...
Sorry, repeat that, the current
legal standing of tokenization. You mentioned that there's an NFT law that's it's aimed to be released by the end of the year, but I wanted to know if the current law differentiates between payment tokens and utility tokens. I can define them both in case the room doesn't know, because it's like a literal...
Please go ahead.
By payment token, what's referred to as a token that whose utility reflects a direct value. So like if it's a token that reflects a painting, and if you own the token, you own the painting, then it's a direct value. Whereas a utility token is one whose kind of associated value is an intangible utility, like a community or an event or something. Is that legally defined yet or no?
So yes, right now the law in the Bahamas does make a distinction. Our current iteration of the DARE Act only recognizes what you classified as payment tokens. So the token must have a direct link to something of value. So there's value underlined in the token, or there's some contractual link to something of value. And so again, the utility tokens are something we're looking into as well in terms of regulating. But right now, for the first iteration that was implemented in 2020, it only references payment tokens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could you introduce a little bit of yourself, and then we can get to know each other a little bit more as well.
Oh,
and then
okay.
The question.
Phil, please feel free to.
Yeah, my name is.
Oh, go ahead. Just give us your name and the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Gosh, you really threw me with that. I just was wondering if there is any legislation around tokenized securities or plan to do that.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Tokenized securities under their act. So, securities such as bonds or, futures being tokenized. Is there a plan to kind of include it under their act? Where do they sit under there?
Yeah, so that's regulated under the Act as well. So you can have tokenization of securities and other assets. The gentleman down here. And then this lady here had a question.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, so here in the UK specifically, towards the end of 2020, the FCA banned effectively financial services firms from offering crypto investment products to retail investors. I'm not sure what the situation with regards to that is in the Bahamas, but with this being an industry in its early days and regulation is evolving, I don't know if there are any other jurisdictions that have adopted the same stance towards retail investors, but do you see the situation changing in the UK with regards to investment products for retail investors and more widely other jurisdictions if that's the case?
I think the industry is in a very interesting space right now because you have a lot of countries that have taken a hard stance on crypto, for example, China, which effectively has banned it as well. You have jurisdictions like the United States that are kind of in a sit and wait pattern, like we're not exactly regulating it, we're not banning it, we're kind of waiting. The Bahamas obviously has taken a more positive approach on it in directly regulating it. The Treasury Secretary of the UK would have given a speech earlier this year that indicated that the UK is currently in sort of research mode to regulate the industry. They spoke about stable coins, they spoke about initial token offerings, they spoke about crypto investments. And so he didn't indicate which side of the fence the UK would land on, but he did indicate that there's a desire that London gets this crypto business and that the UK would regulate it in some way. So I don't think eventually the UK will take a hard stance against those types of investments. I think they're probably going to look around the world at jurisdictions like the Bahamas and other places that have regulated it, figure out sort of best practices, see what has worked, what hasn't worked, and figure out a solution that they think works best for the UK. But I don't think it's going to be a hard stance because they were very clear that this kind of business they think the City of London should get.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Travers, King's Counsel. I practice law just across the road and have done since I left King's a very long time ago. I have two questions, and you may either answer both with your lawyer's hat on or neither with your political hat on. But before I ask them, thank you. That was a lovely exposition of the Bahamian position, and if I may say so, you expressed that very well and very clearly. First question is, in relation to the position as I understood you to communicate it, which is that you see digital currency as a way to financially enfranchise those who are disadvantaged, migrants, the undocumented, the people living in isolated communities. And I'm interested to see how you say that would work when in the UK, the experience is that the move towards nothing so sophisticated as digital currencies, but simply having digital expression of funds tends to take the disadvantaged, the impoverished out of the system rather than put them in it. That's the easy question. The second question is, do you have any anxieties about the success of digital currencies? And when I say that, I mean, do you think there's room for us to be concerned that if all transactions are digitized, the state knows every time we spend a cent and what we spend it on?
Thank you. Two very excellent questions. To address your first question, it's interesting. The Bahamas in many ways is considered a developing country, and in other metrics, the Bahamas is considered a highly developed country. And so we always have issues in dealing with the United Nations or IMF, because sometimes you say we're too developed, we can't get this loan or this facility, and other times you say, well, you're developing, so you're over here. But our experience in terms of technology is that there's actually a very high adoption rate of technology, in particular cell phones and internet usage, even in the far-flung islands where there are limited populations. We've even found that in urban areas in our cities that there's high adoption rates of cell phones. Where it becomes tricky is that people have intermittent access to data and the internet, because that can get expensive, and we experienced that during COVID when we tried to reopen schools, and we found that a lot of students either don't have laptops or have laptops but not access to the internet. But overall, we found that there's a high penetration of cell phones. And just to give a little bit of context in the Bahamas case, gambling in the Bahamas was illegal for a very long time, and in around 2015 it became legal, and our sort of gaming sector became pioneers of ensuring that the masses were connected to the internet, had cell phones. So that's been almost a positive experience from gaming. They created what we call web shops, where people can go in and use the internet. And you guys have this, but it was new for us. And so lots of people in urban areas and our out islands got cell phones simply for that. As me and my colleague were discussing earlier, in spaces where financial services was lacking in these areas, those gaming apps sort of filled that lacuna, because if you had an app, people would deposit funds on your account and take it off and kind of spend that way. So in terms of actual having cell phones and the ability to access the internet, it's actually already there. So that's not the issue that we're experiencing in the Bahamas, and there's fairly good internet access around the Bahamas. So that's not in our experience, but I completely understand how it would be the experience in a lot of different places. Your second question, and I actually also just said this today in a conversation with Dr. Reese Bitter, that's a personal concern of mine as a citizen, but also as a politician in the government. You do lose that anonymity in your financial transactions if everything becomes digital. But as I said, in the Bahamas, we don't necessarily want this to replace cash, but it's there to augment where people sort of need it, or they can it can be advantageous to their situation. And so I know I'm not one of those politicians to shy away from answering questions. I think I personally would shy away from a situation where it's pure digital currency. The government sees all of your transactions, and there's sort of no anonymity. But I don't think that will be the Bahamas experience, but I do think globally that's something to watch out for.
Thank you very much. Again, that was incredibly enjoyable and quite enlightening as well, from a perspective of never having read in more detail about the legislation at present. I'm currently a master's student undertaking an international financial law master's. Awesome. And I'm curious, from a legal perspective, as legislation develops in other nations and in the UK and US and kind of bigger players in that area, really, I'm curious as to if there's anything in your legislation to the effect that would allow other jurisdictions and authorities to have access to records in the case of investigations, whether it be criminal and such. Mm-hmm.
So I'll answer that question in two parts. So since we've implemented the DARE Act, since we've implemented Sand Dollar, lots of jurisdictions from around the world have been contacting our Securities Commission, our government, to learn from us in terms of how we've done it, what has been our experience, and we've always been very open with these jurisdictions. And so I think we have no issue in, providing that information, because as more jurisdictions enter this space, we also want it to be reciprocal so we can learn from their experiences to improve our product. The second part to the answer to that question is the Bahamas financial services industry is highly regulated. We have lots of bilateral agreements with the United Kingdom, with Canada, with the US. We also have agreements with the European Union and lots of bodies around the world for exchange of information. And so the framework for that exchange is already there. So with the US, you have FATCA. With the European Union, you have CRS, where if these bodies internationally were to contact the Bahamian government, our competent authority, we would be obligated to pass on certain information. So the framework for that is already there.
Thank you. That actually really clarifies and how you consider it, as you mentioned previously, that it's a subsect of your financial services. That's
correct.
Implied in those acts then. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a really interesting talk. I'm a PhD student at the law school, and I work here at the War Studies Department on virtual assets and proliferation finance. I think you've answered it in a few ways. Just a quick question, really. In terms of the sand dollar, can the central bank, is it able to view every single transaction that's made with the sand dollar? And if so, if it wants to view those transactions, is there a case where it has to submit a reason why, and that's audited and documented? Because looking at countries like China, for example, it's quite scary, the fact that they could introduce a current central bank digital currency that everyone's forced to use and then view the entirety of that. Yeah, so I was just wondering what the case is in the Bahamas.
So in the Bahamas, just as with cash, the central bank is the authority for the monetary authority in the Bahamas. So it has complete control, supervision, and jurisdiction over cash as well as the sand dollar. So they can see every transaction on the sand dollar app that is from the central bank, but they cannot see the transactions that are on third-party providers, because third parties can also apply to the central bank to deal in sand dollar. But I am told that the central bank can request that information from these payment providers. The court can also request that information from these payment providers for any court cases. So it's not automatic that they see the transactions, but there is the ability in the cases of, for example, anything, money laundering, AML, anti-terrorist financing, that they can request this information from third-party financial services providers. But I do take note of your concern, and I think that concern is perhaps jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Where you have democracies that are fairly transparent, it may not be an issue, but I think in countries that may not be, I definitely can see that as an issue.
Yeah, so adding to this question of data anonymity and transactional anonymity, so is there any sort of due process which has been introduced in your particular legislation, like the DARE Act, to basically ensure that there's no misuse of the provisions and overlooking of the transactions by the government or any authority for that matter? Because basically you have to introduce it to the public in general. You mentioned about, just generating awareness about it. So how do you plan to counter that? Because there is this overlooking of the central bank. So.
Sorry, are you talking about the sand dollar, or are you talking about just generally
the sand dollar in particular,
the digital assets? So can you repeat your question? You say if there's any provision in law to...
Yeah, any due process regarding this where the government can request access to data from third-party service providers, in particular regarding the sand dollar.
Okay, so the Bahamas isn't a centralized state. So the central bank is the authority with supervision over the sand dollar. So the central bank would have, as the supervising body, would have access to that sort of information. any government official or politician or other government entity would not have the automatic right to sort of see these transactions. If that were the case, that all would have to go through a court of law. There would have to be an application as to why you want to see these funds, and a court would have to decide if this particular person or body has jurisdiction or right to sort of see those things. And that's typically how it works with our supervising bodies. In terms of digital assets, the Securities Commission of the Bahamas is the authority for that. So the central bank can't just look into FTX's information filed at the Securities Commission. There needs to be some application to the court to say why the central bank sort of needs this information. So it kind of works separately. It's not one sort of central government where all the information is in one portal or anybody can access or has the authority to sort of view those kinds of things.
There are checks and balances.
So yeah, no, there are definitely checks and balances, and just for those of who don't know, the Bahamas follows the UK Westminster model. So our government is, for the most part, almost a replica. So the institutions are pretty similar, and the processes are pretty similar.
Thank you.
Thanks, Reese Bitter, KBS. I've been following this for maybe like nine months, and this is the clearest exposition I've heard yet. So thanks again. Thanks for meeting me with this afternoon. I've got one question. Have you seen, since the introduction of the sand dollar, integration with smart contracts? Is that even possible given the way it's currently implemented? It seems that there must be an API that the third-party apps must be building on, but can the same sort of API be used to do high-frequency trading and smart contracts and smart money? Has that happened yet, or is it possible?
So I haven't seen that happen, and I know that our central bank tends to be very conservative. So I think that was not a priority for the first iteration of the sand dollar, but I actually haven't seen it happen. I actually haven't even heard of a case where anyone has applied to the central bank or the Securities Commission for that ability, or local businesses sort of dealing with that. But as I said, most of the sand dollar's life has been through COVID. And so I imagine that now that things are opening up and that the digital asset industry is sort of booming in the country now, that we will see more of these questions and folks trying to find out if they can do that. But one thing that I said that would limit the Bahamas from these sorts of high-frequency tradings and international transactions is that we do have foreign exchange laws. And so the Bahamian dollar isn't easily tradable on international exchanges because there needs to be central bank approval before you do that. And that's not really conducive to high-frequency trading, because depending on the transaction and the KYC required, you may not get a response from the central bank for 2 weeks. So people have tried to do that with the regular, Bahamian dollar, and it hasn't worked. And so I think they will likely try again with the sand dollar, but I think we'd have to have an overhaul of our foreign exchange regime before that's possible.
So I think we are hitting the hour, so we will accept 2 more questions, like one there and then one in the front.
Hi, thank you very much for your speech. My name is Phi Long, and I'm currently working with Visa, the payments company. I wanted to ask, with the central bank digital currency, what threats and opportunities does it give to cryptocurrency, the payments providers that already exist, and fintech companies?
Interesting question. I haven't thought about it. So threats and opportunities to, can you repeat that?
Cryptocurrencies, payment companies, and fintechs.
So I think from the Bahamas perspective, I think it would be more opportunities than threat, because I think the more penetrated and the more adoption of digital currencies, whether it's the sand dollar, central bank currency, or cryptocurrency, I think that speaks well overall for the digital asset sort of industry. So the more accustomed people become to using digital currencies, whether it's cryptocurrency or digital assets, I think it's good for the entire industry. So I think it's a great opportunity for the Bahamas, with such a small population, to be one of the first countries in the world that has a wide adoption of digital currency currency and cryptocurrency. So I see it more as opportunities. In terms of threats, as I said, the central bank has a very narrow remit right now of where they see the sand dollar, and so I don't see it necessarily as a threat to cryptocurrency. I think their scope is much wider. Perhaps as adoption of the sand dollar increases, the central bank will widen its scope, but for right now, I see it almost as sort of two sort of separate assets kind of going along the same line, but not necessarily conflicting with each other.
What about payment providers? Are the central bank digital currencies replacing payment providers?
No, so the central bank was very sure and very kind of vocal that they do not want to compete with private sector providers. And so the Sand Dollar app is literally the most basic version of what we've seen in the country, and that's just for people to have sort of easy access to it. But payment providers that have integrated Sand Dollar into their platform, or where you can send, receive, and transaction Sand Dollar, they have more bells and whistles on their app, and they're actively competing with each other in the private sector. So the central bank does not see itself really as an active participant in that market. It does not want to compete. So like I said, we have a history of really working with industry, and the industry was very clear that we don't want to be competing against the central bank. And so that's how it's been so far. So the central bank, very basic app, very basic services, and we leave it to the private sector payment providers. And our hope is that our commercial banks also get into the action, and we leave that to them to kind of put the bells and whistles and kind of take it much further than the central bank could.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carlos. So I'm partnerships at Metapolis, which is a metaverse. I've not really heard you speak about that at all. I'm going to keep it nice and broad because it's a nice last question. So I wasn't sure if the Bahamas are entering that space a lot. Is there any further regulation being built around that? I don't know what's really going on, but it would be nice to hear some.
So that's one of our most kind of fairly new concepts that's now just in discussion. So we haven't. Well, should I say this? There have been very preliminary discussions about the Bahamas entering the metaverse in terms of promoting brand Bahamas, you know, in the metaverse. But they are very preliminary discussions. As many of you may be aware, the Bahamas has also entered the carbon credit and carbon offset space. Again, we're one of the only countries in the world that are about to trade blue carbon credits. So there's also discussions of also having that in the metaverse as well. But these are very preliminary sort of discussions, nothing very concrete, but you know, we try to stay on the cutting edge. We try to look at the crystal ball. So all of these things are in discussions in various government committees and within the private sector, but nothing has been formalized as yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we do one more question? I see that gentleman raising his hand. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, we'd love to talk to you if you're in that space.
Sure, we can talk after.
Yes.
So my name is Xu Jun. I used to be very interested in financial market and different asset classes. Certainly the digital assets, digital accounts and these Bitcoins are very different from the traditional stocks, bonds, at least in the sense.
Sorry, I'm just having a little bit difficulty.
At least the traditional class of assets are linked to the real economy, supported by the cash flow. And also, you know, it's also become uncertain, volatile, depending on the general economy and the inflation. But this Bitcoin isn't like that. It doesn't have a social use, not linked to the real economy. Is it just for speculative purpose to make money for some people, yet it doesn't have a social use? In that sense, probably the real contribution in this digital, the new fintech thinking is about something else, maybe intellectually some intellectual thinking can be used in other asset class or in digital accounts or whatever. So just your comments. Your talk is more about regulation, not about what it is ontology, assets, its own differences from the traditional ones. Any comments?
Yeah, I think his question is dealing with the utility purposes of Bitcoin and how is it linked back to the bigger economy. So perhaps your final note on that.
Sorry, can you, so what exactly
so like I think he's thinking about like what's the utility purpose, what is the usage or use case for Bitcoin, like or these kind of like a blockchain-based crypto asset, and how is it linked back to the real world economy? I think that's his question. Just a no or no. You want to comment on it or you don't want to comment on it?
I'm not exactly sure I understand the question.
Yeah, so I think he's like, what's the purpose of Bitcoin and Ethereum, like certain cryptocurrency, I think. Or is it just for speculation? I think that's his question.
I honestly think it depends on who you talk to, and I think as a world we're still trying to figure that out. I think folks in the space sort of create that utility for Bitcoin or trying to, and when you talk to some people even in the Bahamas who aren't bullish on crypto, they think it's just pure speculation, and the crash that sort of just happened to them was sort of vindication for that view. And so I think, as I said before, I do believe that cryptocurrency is here to stay in some form or fashion, but we don't know yet. And I think the next probably year or two, we'll kind of see that utility kind of form, and we'd be able to make a better judgment. But I don't think I have the exact answer to that now.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you for your wonderful questions. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. And yes, like if you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to Barry. Yes. And then we also have plenty of time to talk tonight still, once we move to the reception. Thank you so much, and let's network. Yes.
So thank you for having me. I hope the conversation was useful. Alexis, please feel free to pass on my contact information to anybody who wants it. I'm happy to answer questions or have discussions. I'm on LinkedIn, Barry N. Griffin on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, Barry N. Griffin. So please feel free to add me and hit me up.
Perfect.
Thank you.